Have you noticed how modern dating can feel like standing trial in a court with moving laws? How the fear of saying the wrong thing knots your tongue? How kindness is read as weakness and directness as threat? How the cold hour after midnight tastes of failure even when you did nothing wrong? Have you felt women you love harden into judges? Not because they are cruel, but because something larger is using them as a mirror that shows you small. Carl Jung gives names to the winds. He speaks of the collective unconscious, patterns older than any headline, archetypes that surface through culture and steer us without permission. Among them is the feminine principle, the anima, which in a man can either humanize his strength or domesticate it into mood and compliance. This is not a war on women. It is a diagnosis of forces that move through women and men alike. If you can see those forces, you can stop bargaining with them. If you can name the pattern, you can step out of it. If you can face what rises from below, you can become someone who is no longer negotiated by the crowd's weather, but authored from within. Jung says culture swims in a sea of images and instincts older than our biographies. You think you are arguing with a person. You are often wrestling with an archetype wearing a person's face. In our moment, the feminine principle has flooded public feeling. Care, sensitivity, consensus, safety, and harmony have become moral absolutes, while risk, assertion, hierarchy, and solitude are treated with suspicion. Many men meet this as pressure to be agreeable and endlessly available, to apologize before speaking, to smooth every contour of presence until no weight remains. Jung warns that when the anima is not integrated, it possesses a man. He becomes captive to mood, sentimental rhetoric, and a subtle contempt for his own spine. He projects onto women the power to define him and then resents them for exercising what he handed over. Dating becomes a theater of projection. She carries the promise of absolution. He performs whatever earns a nod from the air between them. If she withdraws, his world collapses because he had placed the axis there. The archetypal feminine is not women. It is a psychic function that lives in everyone. When it rules a man from the basement, it turns his strength into serviceable softness and calls that maturity. He becomes fond of language that flatters helplessness. He speaks in disclaimers. He mistakes niceness for goodness and confusion for depth. To name this is not to despise care. It is to recognize that the sea has a current and that men drown when they pretend it is a bathtub. The task is to meet the anima, honor her gifts of empathy and imagination, and then put the steering wheel back in the hands of a conscious center. Without that recentering, modern cultural feminine energy recruits men into permanent adolescence, always seeking permission, always reading the room, always forfeiting direction for approval. Jung calls the persona the social mask, the compromise between the individual and the demands of the collective. In an era where care is the supreme virtue, the persona offered to men is the gentleman mask. Be unthreatening, be perpetually flexible, preface your sentences with apologies, and never hold a line if it costs warmth. Many adopt this mask to survive the dating market, the office, and the digital square. They do not see the invoice. The bill arrives as chronic self-betrayal, romantic exhaustion, and a gnawing sense that desire itself has become rude. A man learns to smile through dismissal and to translate his hunger into caregiving until he does not know what he wants apart from being wanted. Under this soft matriarchy, institutions begin to mirror the archetypal great mother's shadow, safe, enveloping, and quietly devouring. Policies tilt toward comfort over challenge. Rhetoric favors inclusion over excellence. Conflict is framed as harm and disagreement as aggression. The man who internalizes this weather becomes talented at temperature control and allergic to confrontation. Jung would say he is over-identified with persona and underdeveloped in self, the deeper organizing center. He mistakes acceptance for identity. He fears the loneliness that would follow from refusing the mask. So he tells himself he is being moral when he is being managed. Women are not the enemy here. Many suffer inside the same currents, frustrated by men who cannot bring heat without cruelty or tenderness without collapse. The problem is not care, but the absolutizing of care into a law that flattens vigor. When a man's worth depends on never disturbing the mood, his eros withers. He stops proposing and starts hinting. He stops declaring and starts negotiating. He wonders why the spark dies while he is busy keeping the peace. Jung's answer is unsentimental. The persona is useful only if it is transparent to a stronger interior. When the mask becomes the man, the collective owns him. He blends into what the moment asks and loses the capacity to surprise himself with truth. Jung teaches that what we repress does not vanish, it waits. The shadow is the unlived life, the energy we disown because the collective or our conscience says no. In a climate where masculine force is pre-criminalized, many men exile their aggression, hunger, competitiveness, and penetrating speech. They think virtue requires sedation. They speak gently about everything until resentment hardens under the carpet. The shadow returns as sarcasm, secret porn, seething contempt for the very women whose approval they seek, and bursts of rage that terrify them. The culture points to these eruptions as proof that the heat was evil. Jung points to the repression that made it blind. The feminine principle, when inflated, prefers warmth without fire. It praises emotion and distrusts assertion, unless assertion serves collective mood. Men trained under this bias learn to be intelligible only when they are tame. They keep score in silence. They perform empathy and call it love, while avoiding the clarity that would jeopardize harmony. Jung warns that an anima-possessed man will drown in feelings he cannot interpret. He will become a critic of sunlight. He will sneer at decisiveness as primitive and at responsibility as an old myth, all while craving a father he can respect. The way out is not a swing to brutality, but a reconciliation with the shadow's gold. Assertiveness is not violence. Desire is not dirt. Competition is not cruelty. The unlived energies must be owned, named, and bound to aims. Otherwise, they leak into the very softness that pretends to forbid them. Many women long for this integration. They are tired of carrying both poles in a relationship. They want a man who can be gentle because he can be dangerous, not because he is harmless. Jung's psychology does not give permission to dominate. It gives permission to exist with weight. When a man retrieves his shadow, he stops asking the feminine to loan him a spine and starts bringing one. The collective will scold him for making waves. Let it. Waves remind the sea it is alive. Jung observed that a man seized by his anima becomes captive to moods that feel like weather. In a culture where the feminine tone sets the pitch of acceptable speech, mood becomes governance. Sentiment replaces thought. Sympathy replaces judgment. Stories replace standards. The man learns to orient by feeling states he cannot verify. He asks the room what is true. He waits for a temperature that gives him permission to speak. Algorithms reward him for anxiety and punish him for clarity. He is enlightened by trending grief and educated by outrage. He calls this empathy. Often it is hypnosis. An anima-possessed man will project onto women the burden of defining reality. If she smiles, he exists. If she withdraws, he collapses. If the crowd praises him, he is virtuous. If it shames him, he is guilty. Jung would call this participation mystique, a dissolving of the self into the group's feeling body. It feels communal. It it is a loss of center. Dating becomes a ritual in which he auditions for acceptance. Work becomes a theater in which he curates harmlessness. Friendship becomes a circle where men confess weakness but never call each other to strength, because strength would break the spell. The feminine principle at its best civilizes raw power and opens the heart to nuance. At its worst, when inflated and unopposed, it polices reality with tears and treats boundaries as aggression. Men who cannot bear disapproval will yield to this soft control and call the submission moral growth. Jung's counsel is interior sovereignty. He speaks of the self as the ordering center deeper than persona, deeper than mood. From there, a man can feel with others without drowning in them. He can treat emotions as information rather than commands. He can extend care without renting his spine. There is a simple test. If your day is piloted by what will avoid friction, you are likely possessed. If your truth changes with the room, you are likely drifting. If your apologies precede your convictions, you are likely negotiating with weather. Jung is blunt. The man who will not risk the crowd's chill will never meet his own fire. Reclaiming center does not mean despising feeling. It means refusing to let feelings sit in the throne that belongs to the self. Only then can empathy become strength rather than anesthesia. Jung described the Great Mother as an archetype with two faces. She nourishes, shelters, and gives life, and she also can smother, infantilize, and swallow. At scale, modern institutions often mirror her shadow face. Schools preach safety as salvation. Corporations ritualize belonging while extracting obedience. Media sentimentalizes harm until disagreement smells like violence. The promise is protection from discomfort. The cost is adulthood. Men acclimate to padded walls and call it civilization. They become experts at reading policies and strangers at reading their own aim. The devouring mother does not rage. She coos. She offers extensions, warnings, channels for complaint, endless therapeutic language, and no rites of passage. A man can grow old without ever being initiated. He learns to treat risk as pathology and responsibility as suspect unless crowdsourced. He seeks mothers in bosses, lovers, and timelines. He craves reassurance more than victory. He wonders why women lose respect when he never fails loudly enough to be interesting. None of this indicts actual mothers, many of whom carry the world on little sleep and deserve honor. It indicts a civilization that has expanded the maternal function without the paternal counterweight of law, structure, and demand. Jung would say the father archetype names the principle that sets limits and invites danger in service of form. Where that principle is weakened, the son stays in the house. He confuses comfort with goodness and novelty with growth. He dates for validation, not selection. He works for praise, not mastery. He prays for relief, not transformation. Men suffer here in quiet ways. They are safe, and they are bored. They are included, and they are invisible. They are entertained, and they are starved. The solution is not contempt for care, but the return of form. A culture that only soothes teaches men to outsource courage to policy. Jung's psychology insists that the self must grow teeth. Without demands, love suffocates. Without tests, strength atrophies. The Great Mother is best when paired with a father who asks for something. When that marriage breaks, men drift in velvet fog. They do not need harsher enemies. They need sharper edges. Jung's path is individuation, the slow alignment of persona, shadow, anima, and ego around the self. The goal is not to banish the feminine principle, but to befriend it without being ruled. When a man integrates his anima, he gains access to imagination, compassion, and aesthetic sensitivity. He can read a room without worshipping it. He can love a woman without asking her to be his conscience. He can cry without asking tears to make decisions. He becomes more human, not less masculine. Jung said, "He who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." The awakening is not a mood, it is a center. Integration begins with confession, naming the places where the collective feminine has been allowed to pilot your days. It continues with retrieval, reclaiming the shadow energies you exile to stay acceptable. It ripens as distinction, learning the difference between care and capitulation, between empathy and agreement, between apology and surrender. It ends in marriage, not war. The inner union of eros and logos, where warmth serves reason and reason cherishes warmth. A man like this is hard to manipulate. He is neither brittle nor vague. He can be led by love and still say no to the form love must take. This is not a campaign against women or the feminine. It is a refusal to let a single archetype, inflated by history and amplified by media, write your script. Many women ache for this reconciliation in the men around them. They are tired of performing both poles. They want partners, not sons. Protectors, not performers. Men who can enter their depth without drowning or trying to drain the sea. Jung offers a map that does not require bitterness. He asks for courage in quiet rooms, honesty at the mirror, and loyalty to an interior center that does not beg crowds for oxygen. When the feminine is integrated rather than enthroned, the male becomes beautiful in a way the crowd no longer recognizes. He is patient without passivity, assertive without contempt, protective without possession. He can lose an argument without losing himself. He can be alone without being lonely, because his solitude is populated by powers he has met and befriended. The collective will still try to recruit him. He will still feel the tug of moods and the seduction of safety. But the wheel is no longer for rent. He belongs to the self, and therefore he can belong to others without disappearing. If this named the ache you carry in lines you rarely say aloud, write a sentence that draws you back to center in the comments below and like this video. Share it with a brother who keeps mistaking softness for good and silence for love, and subscribe to the channel. Remember, you are not required to rage to be strong, nor to flatter to be kind. Look inside and wake. Integrate what is beautiful in the feminine and refuse what rules. Become a man who does not vanish when the weather changes.